The black umbrella did little to shield Victoria Bennett from the November rain, but she hardly noticed. Water trickled down her neck as she stood rigidly before the empty casket draped with the American flag. Behind her, a small gathering of mourners huddled beneath the funeral tent, their faces a blur of sympathy she couldn't bear to acknowledge. Lieutenant Alexander Parker gave his life in service to his country, the chaplain's words carried across the cemetery. Though his body could not be recovered, his sacrifice will never be forgotten. Victoria's fingers tightened around the small metal object in her palm, Alex's watch, the only personal effect recovered from the mission. The agency had delivered it to her 3 weeks ago, along with the news that the extraction had failed. Communication lost, presumed dead. She didn't believe it, not at first. 20 yards away, partially concealed by an ancient oak, a solitary figure observed the ceremony. The beard and worn leather jacket were unfamiliar, but beneath them, Lieutenant Alexander Parker watched his own funeral with a hollow ache in his chest. His right hand unconsciously rubbed the still-healing scar that ran from wrist to elbow, a souvenir from his captors. He'd been given up for dead once his extraction team had been ambushed. The intelligence leak that had compromised his position couldn't have been accidental. Someone had wanted him eliminated, and they'd nearly succeeded. Alex shifted his weight, the pain in his left knee, a constant reminder of the 30-foot drop he'd made during his escape 3 weeks ago. He shouldn't be here. It was dangerous for both of them. But he had to see her, to know she was all right, even if he couldn't reach out and touch her. Victoria accepted the folded flag with trembling hands as the honor guard completed the ceremony. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a practical style for her work as an intelligence analyst, fell loose around her shoulders. Even from this distance, Alex could see she'd lost weight, her black dress hanging loosely on her frame. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Director Holloway said, approaching Victoria after the ceremony. "Alexander was one of our finest operatives." "Thank you, sir," Victoria replied mechanically, her expression carefully composed. As the agency's head of European operations, Holloway had personally assigned Alex to the ill-fated mission. "If there's anything you need—" "Actually, sir, I'd like to return to work as soon as possible." Her voice was steady, despite the grief etched into her features. "Sitting at home isn't helping." Alex felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Victoria was determined as always, but he worried about what she might uncover if she started digging. "Of course," Holloway nodded. "Monday, then? The Belgrade analysis could use your expertise." From his position, Alex watched as the mourners gradually dispersed, leaving Victoria alone by the casket. Only when the cemetery workers approached to complete their task did she finally turn away. Alex waited until she reached her car before slipping away. He'd already stayed too long. The men who had tried to kill him would be watching Victoria, waiting for him to make contact. His instincts screamed at him to go to her, to tell her everything, but that would only put her in danger. He had evidence to gather, conspirators to identify, and a careful plan to execute before he could come back from the dead. Until then, he would remain a ghost watching over her from the shadows. As Victoria drove away from the cemetery, she glanced at her rearview mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw a familiar silhouette among the headstones, but when she looked, again, there was nothing but rain and gathering dusk. In her apartment that evening, Victoria placed the folded flag in the bedroom she had shared with Alex. Their engagement photo smiled back at her from the nightstand. Alex, in his formal uniform, his arm around her waist at the agency's annual gala just 3 months ago. She opened her laptop and pulled up the classified file on Operation Starfall, Alex's final mission. The file had been heavily redacted, but Victoria had access to intelligence systems most agents didn't. If there were answers to be found, she would find them. "I don't believe you're gone," she whispered to the empty room, "and I won't stop until I know the truth." 6 miles away, in a nondescript motel room, Alex Parker removed his disguise and checked the encrypted phone he'd acquired. No messages from his one remaining contact inside the agency. He couldn't risk digital communication with Victoria, not yet. Tomorrow he would begin tracking the money trail that had led to his betrayal. He looked at the burner phone's wallpaper, a covertly taken photo of Victoria from last summer, laughing by the lake at her family's cabin. Someday, he promised himself, someday they would be together again. But first he had to uncover the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. 6 months after the memorial service, Victoria's apartment had become a war room. Maps of Eastern Europe covered one wall, with red string connecting locations relevant to Alex's final mission. Her dining table disappeared beneath stacks of redacted files she'd managed to access through her security clearance. "You're obsessed, Vic," said her colleague Natalie, perched on the edge of the sofa. "It's been half a year. The psych department is getting concerned." Victoria tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The mission parameters changed 3 times before Alex deployed. That's unprecedented for a simple extraction operation. "We work for an intelligence agency. Information evolves," Natalie said, gently. "Have you considered the grief counseling Holloway recommended?" Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Check your mailbox." "I need to get something downstairs," she said abruptly. In her mailbox was an unmarked envelope containing only a chess piece, a black knight. Victoria's heart pounded. It was their signal, established years ago when they first started working. Together, a message only Alex would know to send. Across town, in a rundown apartment rented under a false name, Alex Parker studied the surveillance photos he'd taken of the agency's deputy director, William Mercer. The man had met 3 times in the past month with Anton Volkov, a known arms dealer. Something wasn't right. Alex's burner phone rang, his only contact within the agency. "Hawthorne," said the gruff voice of his former mentor. "They're watching." "Bennett's been flagged for accessing classified materials related to Starfall. Has she found anything?" "Nothing concrete, but she's getting close. Mercer's ordered surveillance on her apartment." Alex's jaw tightened. "I sent her a message today. Had to let her know I'm alive." "Damn it, Parker. You're putting her in danger." "She's already in danger," Alex countered. "Better she knows what she's up against." That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. The chess piece meant Alex was alive, unless someone was cruelly manipulating her grief. She slipped out of bed at 2 a.m. and noticed a subtle reflection from the building across the street. Binoculars. Someone was watching her apartment. She casually closed the curtains and retrieved her agency-issued sidearm from the safe. Something was very wrong, and for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope mixed with terror. Victoria's car screeched around the corner, tires protesting as she escaped her pursuers. What had begun as a routine drive home from headquarters had turned deadly when a black SUV had tried to force her off the bridge. Her attacker's vehicle was gaining. The side mirror exploded as a bullet struck it. Victoria swerved down an alley, praying for an escape route. Suddenly, a motorcycle roared alongside her, the rider's face obscured by a helmet. He gestured urgently toward an underground parking garage. With no better options, Victoria followed. Inside the darkened garage, the motorcycle led her to a maintenance tunnel. The rider dismounted and approached her window. Victoria raised her gun. "It's me, Vic," he said, removing his helmet. The face was thinner, with a scar running along his jawline that hadn't been there before. But the eyes, those were eyes she'd know anywhere. "Alex," she whispered, trembling. He opened her door. "We have about 3 minutes before they find your car. Come with me if you want answers." The safe house was a studio apartment on the outskirts of town. Alex secured the locks, while Victoria stood frozen, still processing the reality of him. Alive, breathing, moving with the slight limp she'd noticed during their escape. "They told me you were dead," she finally said, her voice cracking. "I buried an empty casket." "I nearly was," Alex replied, removing his jacket to reveal more scars on his forearms. "Captured during extraction, held for 16 days. When I escaped, I discovered the mission was compromised from the beginning." Victoria approached him cautiously, her hand reaching out to touch his face, confirming he was real. "Who?" "Mercer, for one. Possibly Holloway, though I'm not certain. They're selling weapons tech to Volkov's network." Her touch became a caress, and suddenly they were in each other's arms, 6 months of grief and longing collapsing into desperate kisses. Victoria's tears mingled with their embrace. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered against his lips. Hours later, tangled in the safe house's sheets, Victoria traced the scar on Alex's chest. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" "They're watching you," he said. "Coming to you meant putting you in their crosshairs. But you started digging on your own, and now they've decided you're a threat. What's our next move?" Alex kissed her forehead. "We gather evidence. You from the inside, me from the shadows. We can't be seen together again until this is over." "I can't lose you a second time," Victoria said fiercely. "You won't," he promised. "But we need to be smarter than they are." Dawn was breaking as they reluctantly prepared to separate. Their goodbye kiss held both promise and fear, neither knowing when they would be together again. Victoria adjusted her earpiece as she entered the agency's secure records facility. "I'm in," she murmured, knowing Alex could hear her through the encrypted connection. "Security cameras loop starts in 30 seconds, his voice replied in her ear. "You'll have 8 minutes. Since their reunion 3 weeks ago, they had been meticulously building their case." Victoria maintained her routine at headquarters while secretly gathering evidence. Alex worked from the outside, tracking financial transactions through shell companies connected to Mercer. Victoria quickly located the classified server and inserted the drive Alex had provided. "Downloading now. 4 minutes remaining," Alex warned. He was parked 3 blocks away in a maintenance van, monitoring the agency's security feeds through a hack he'd implemented days earlier. The download completed with a minute to spare. Victoria pocketed the drive and calmly exited the records facility, nodding to the guard as she passed. That evening they reunited at a different safe house, a cabin owned by Hawthorne under his deceased wife's maiden name. "It's all here," Victoria said, reviewing the files they'd extracted. "Operation Starfall was a cover. They needed you in that region to unwittingly authenticate a weapons transfer." Alex nodded grimly. "And when I started asking questions about the change in parameters, they decided you were a liability," she finished. Their eyes met across the table, the weight of the betrayal hanging heavy between them. Victoria moved to his side, her hand finding his. "We have enough to take to Director Rivers," she said, referring to the agency's executive director, who outranked both Holloway and Mercer. Alex pulled her onto his lap, burying his face in her neck. "It's not without risk. If Rivers is involved..." "He's not. I've been watching him. Rivers has been investigating unusual budget allocations that Mercer approved." Their discussion gave way to more urgent needs, the constant danger heightening every touch as they made their way to the bedroom. Each time might be their last, and they both knew it. Later, as moonlight filtered through the cabin windows, Alex watched Victoria sleep. Tomorrow, they would make their move. Either they would succeed in exposing the conspiracy, or they would likely both be killed. He tightened his arm around her, vowing silently that he would die before letting any harm come to her. Victoria stirred. "Stop thinking so loudly," she murmured sleepily. "We're going to win." Alex kissed her shoulder. "How can you be so sure?" "Because," she said, turning to face him, "the truth is on our side, and we're a hell of a team." Director Rivers' office was silent as he reviewed the evidence Victoria and Alex had presented. Outside, agency security stood ready, waiting for his orders. "If what you're showing me is accurate," Rivers said finally, "this is the biggest breach we've had in decades." "It's accurate," Alex confirmed. "I have the physical scars to prove it." Rivers studied the man who had been legally dead for nearly 7 months. "Lieutenant Parker, I'm sorry for what you've endured, but your reappearance needs to be handled more carefully." "With respect, sir," Victoria interjected. "Careful handling is what allowed this conspiracy to flourish. We need decisive action." Rivers nodded slowly. "You'll have it." He pressed his intercom. "Security, please escort Deputy Director Mercer and Operations Director Halloway to Conference Room A. Inform them it's regarding Operation Starfall." 30 minutes later, Mercer entered the conference room, Halloway a step behind. Both men froze when they saw Alex Parker sitting at the table. "Impossible," Mercer whispered. "I'm remarkably hard to kill," Alex replied coolly, "especially when I know who's trying to do the killing." Rivers gestured to the security team. "Deputy Director Mercer, you're being detained pending investigation into treason, conspiracy, and attempted murder." Mercer lunged for his concealed weapon, but Victoria was faster. She tackled him to the ground, disarming him with practiced efficiency. "You're making a terrible mistake," Halloway protested, as security restrained him. "We were authorized." "By whom?" Rivers demanded. "Because I've spoken with the secretary, and no such authorization exists." As the conspirators were led away, Rivers turned to Victoria and Alex. "The cleanup from this will take months. Lieutenant Parker's return from the dead will need to be handled through proper channels." "And us, sir?" Victoria asked. "My involvement in this unauthorized investigation is precisely why I'm promoting you to head the task force that will root out any remaining conspirators," Rivers finished. "As for Lieutenant Parker, once medical clears him, I'll need someone with his unique perspective on our European operations." 3 months later, a small wedding took place at Victoria's family cabin by the lake. Alex stood without his cane for the first time since his return, watching as Victoria walked toward him in a simple white dress. Hawthorne, serving as best man, leaned over. "Never thought I'd see the day, Parker." "Neither did I," Alex admitted, his eyes never leaving his bride. The ceremony was brief, attended only by their closest friends and Victoria's family. No one from the agency except Hawthorne and Rivers, who had become an unexpected ally. As they exchanged vows, Victoria squeezed Alex's hands. "For better or worse," she promised, "no more disappearing acts." "No more secrets," he agreed. At the reception, as they swayed to their first dance, Alex whispered in her ear, "Do you ever wonder what normal people worry about?" Victoria laughed. "Probably not whether their spouse is actually dead when reported missing, or if their honeymoon location has adequate security protocols," he added with a smile. She rested her head on his shoulder. "We're never going to be normal, are we?" "No," Alex said, pulling her closer. "But we're alive, we're together, and the bad guy's lost. I'll take it." As dusk settled over the lake, the newlyweds slipped away from their guests. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges in the intelligence world they both served. But tonight was theirs alone, a moment of peace hardly imaginable during those dark months when Alex had watched her from the shadows, unable to reach out and tell her he was alive. Victoria took his hand as they walked along the moonlit shore. "Ready for our next mission, Lieutenant Parker?" Alex smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "With you as my partner, always." The future remained uncertain in their dangerous profession, but one thing was clear. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.